I'm going to make the point that Lincoln evolved from a boy who went to church because his parents took him to church, to something of a skeptic as a young man, and whose true early religious orientation, faith orientation, is a little hard to figure out, and maybe will never be figured out.
One of his best friends, David Davis, lifelong judicial associate, later appointed by Lincoln to the Supreme Court, probably was close to the truth when he said, after Lincoln's death, "I don't know anything about Lincoln's religion, nor do I think anybody else knows anything about it." Even his wife wasn't absolutely sure what his religious beliefs were. She said, and this may come closest to the truth of all, that religion was a kind of poetry in his nature.
He went through more than any other president ever went through. I mean, 750,000 fellow Americans and sister Americans dying. But he got the chance to be a Moses at the same time and echo the words of Leviticus with action, proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. And in the end, he got to be a Jesus figure as well. I'm sure that wouldn't have been his choice, but he did die on Good Friday, or was shot on Good Friday. And his fame rose, not to be disrespectful, but his fame rose on Easter Sunday, which is when millions and millions of Americans went to church and in their worship services consecrated Lincoln as much as they consecrated the first martyr. And it really made his reputation almost saint-like. There's been nothing like it, thankfully, in the history of the country. That combination of national political mourning, secular mourning, and religious awakening that accompanied his death.
He also happened to be running against a minister, a preacher named Peter Cartwright. And Lincoln couldn't help himself. Went to one of Cartwright's famous revival sermons, an outdoor event in the Springfield area. There was a mass of people there, and Lincoln was right in the front row. And at one point, Cartwright did what apparently he did at all of his revival meetings. He said, "All of the people here who are worried that they are going to go to heaven, worried that they're going to go to hell, please stand up." And about 8 or 9 sinners stood up. And Cartwright said, "And all of you who are convinced that you're going to heaven, please stand up." Everyone else stood up, with one notable exception. Abraham Lincoln was still sitting where this gentleman is, and he hadn't stood up for either of those alternatives. And Cartwright looked down in the front row and he said, "Mr. Lincoln, my opponent, I see that you don't think you're going to heaven or you're going to hell. Where, may I ask, is your destination?" And Lincoln yelled back, "If it's all the same to you, Reverend, I'm going to Congress."
He said many times, "I've been driven to my knees in desperation." Not only the guidance, but I think he needed a higher being at his side to justify what was happening. Now, that's a dangerous phenomenon. Leaders who say that God is directing them often become tyrannical and despotic. And there were people in his day who said that Lincoln was a despot, and Lincoln was a tyrant, and Lincoln was abridging state rights and freedom of speech and freedom of the press. He had to console himself that there was a plan, and he was simply acting out the plan, and he said that many times. He did bring God into the conversation ever more steadily, but it was not the way he began his political career at all. He was a very secular politician at first.
So the big change for Lincoln happens, I think, on February 11th, 1861, one day before his 52nd birthday. He tells reporters he's not going to make a speech when he leaves his hometown for his inauguration. And then he stands on that back platform and he speaks. And then he rewrites it afterwards. But essentially, he made a pretty astonishing remark. First, he said, "There was a task before me greater than that which rested upon Washington." The signal of a new Lincoln, if there ever was one, because people didn't compare themselves to Washington in those days. And then he said something the likes of which he had never said before. "Without the assistance of the divine being, whoever attended him," meaning Washington, "I cannot succeed. With that assistance, I cannot fail. Trusting in him who can go with me and remain with you and be everywhere for good, let us confidently hope that all will yet be well. To his care commending you, as I hope in your prayers you will commend me, I bid you an affectionate farewell. And then the train pulled out as he remained on the platform waving.
He was preaching a higher goal, which was a unified country dedicated to opportunity and to basic human rights for everybody, to end this terrible stain of slavery that had really polluted the country and made our reputation so hypocritical around the world. And he fought for that. So any missionary that fights on a one-on-one basis or a village-to-village basis, spreading the same word, which is that people should have the opportunity to worship as they please, to work as hard as they can, to achieve what their talents will allow. That's the best example of America and the whole spirit of mission and that we could ever aspire to.
I really enjoyed the program today. I learned a lot about Lincoln, his faith and religion, and I look forward to the next lecture.
I'm not even a history-interested person, and he was absolutely fascinating. I actually want to read his books now. That's how good the speech was.
Harold Holzer is a great authority on Abraham Lincoln, but he also brings him to life through his knowledge in so many ways.